Do, ré, fa, si, la, sol, ré, do. Do, ré, fa, si, la, sol, mi, fa. Do, ré, fa, si, la, sol, sol, fa. Mi, fa, la, mi, ré, do, ré, do. Do, ré, fa, si, la, sol, ré, do. Do, ré, fa, si, la, sol, mi, fa. Do, ré, fa, si, la, sol, sol, sol. Sol, sol, ré, ré, do. Si. To speak the music is to tell the music to oneself, to, in fact, spell the notes is the syllables of the words that make the sentences. And I find it very intuitive to find the right tempo when you can speak it. Perhaps you can put in imaginary, silly possibly, for the exercise, fun lyrics. I would like to play with you. I would like to dance with you. Of course, this kind of system of mnemotechnic organization of the flow of the notes is a little bit of a childish way. I agree. The other way is to play the notes and count the beats in order to keep the pulse, which the tempo, well, that's not always the same, is the structure of the beats. And then you have the structure of the phrase with the amount of group of bars within the phrase chosen by the composer's meter in the first ballade by Chopin, which I was speaking earlier, do, re, fa, si, la, sol, re, do, si, d, f, b, a, g, d, c, which is not as intuitive to me in English, to solfège in spelling the notes with the English words, C, D, F, G, A, B, E, F. Do, re, fa, si, la, sol, mi, fa. I would like to dance with you. I know it's silly. E, F, A, E, D, C sharp, D, C natural. When you return to G minor, after the hope of raising the expectation in relative major. And then the half diminished chord that brings us back to our condition of G minor, which is the sorrow compared to the hope. Okay, all this is a little bit schematic and possibly, again, childish. But I find that ultimately when we over-intellectualize and we read the score and we think about how others play it and we start organizing the sounds for the sake of the sounds. So we make beautiful individual sounds, not necessarily a meaningful phrase. In other words, I have to put, well, like everything, meaning in what you express. But it is true that, like languages, the beauty is in the sound, like in poems, of the words themselves. And therefore, when you combine them with the language meaning, then you hear more the meaning that you convey through the thoughts that you express through the words than the sound of the music of the words, unless it's a foreign language, in which case you listen to it for the music of it, but you don't know if the meaning is offensive or endearing because you don't have a connection between the meaning and the sounds. Therefore, you only hear the sounds per se, like this is a sound and this is a dominant and this is a tonic, and then we have a second degree stop or a dominant stop in the secondary statement. And then we go to the relative major dominant and then return after this hope to G minor. And so, of course, this first ballade by Chopin has this compelling melodic line with a harmonic underlining, and then these 6/4 meter that Chopin chose, which gives longer bars to read, therefore intellectually, or perhaps receive intuitively what he suggests by not doing it in 3 bar line, 2 3 bar line, 2 3 bar line. Of course, thankfully you don't hear the bar lines when you play, but when you read, but they format your understanding of the structure of the phrase. And because he wrote it in 6/4, you have a longer group of notes before bar line only here. 4 5 6 bar line. And once you take those 4 bars of 6 beats, then you have the phrase. So that would be the real first bar line, which would complete the structured group of bars. Of course, this looks like a little bit, again, intellectualizing the intuitive tension release, a rise of the expression and drop of the chromaticism or of the semi-steps that gives you psychologically the feel that you're rising and redropping. So you can feel it, you don't have to explain it, and if you analyze it, it doesn't mean you feel it better, you just structure it in a way that you then play as a performer to bring the phrase to a certain arrival point when the intuition purely so closes the opening statement, and then instead of. And that is not defined in the score in terms of dynamic range, the hairpin of the dynamic crescendo diminuendo. And you can also argue he uses eighth notes and then quarter notes. What if he had done the opposite, think outside of the box to understand better the meaning of his choice? If he had started with quarter notes and finish the phrase, at least the structure of the opening, with the eighth notes rather than start with the eighth notes. And if you say it, do, re, fa, si, la, sol, re, do, you don't harmonize, you don't sing pitches, do, re, fa, si, la, sol, re, do. Sorry for singing, but the point is you mean it. And then when you play it, you start organizing, holding, pedal, harmonizing. Then you have the chords accompaniment, the melody that decays with the resonance, and the chords that overlap. So you start managing, as a pianist, all these elements that you have to deal with. It's not an orchestra. You have somebody playing the melody, others people playing the accompaniment. You play all. You manage all, you layer all, you organize all, you voice all, and you choose. And sometimes you don't control as much as what you wish, and you have to plan ahead the decay of the long values so that the harmony comes in Chopin after the melodic line is heard alone. Sol, re, do. Again, sorry for singing. Of course, Chopin's piano sings like Bellini operas he liked so much, with the different bel canto patterns, like the decorative cadenzas. And so therefore, yes, it is lyrical. But he doesn't accompany the harmonization on the beat with a pattern like the Alberti. He lets the melody suspended alone and harmonizes it, so to say, like to think of this analogy as the shadow of the comet. And you have it coming after. The harmonization comes after the melody is heard alone. Therefore, you have to manage the pedal not to overlap, because if you overstay, then the harmony lags compared to the next melodic note. And all this is not meant when you speak it or sing it, as I did, do, re, fa, si, la, sol, re, do. But what helps a lot, in my humble opinion, is to always restate it to yourself outside of all these obvious obligations when you play it. Just for the simple melodic line that it is, with or without imaginary lyrics or just the solfeging notes. And then when you display it, you have to play everything, but you still hear one note leading to the arrival note. So when you start the phrase, you have to plan where it leads you, but in the tempo, without a rush. They have to do substitutions in order to not have a gap because of the leap. You have to organize fingerings that correspond, pedaling that doesn't overlap, chords that play softer than the melody, taking into account the decay of the long values, where the instrument of the piano does not sustain a vibrato like a singer would do, or imitating the singing of the piano on the piano, which is a percussive instrument, but in denial with Chopin. And then you have and you have singers, pianists, so to say, like Gould, who needs to express the drive of the phrase direction arching by humming it almost when he plays, which is annoying to some, I think is amusing to most. But I find it fantastic because it shows how much we are in denial of this decay of the tone, and we want to bring it further. And of course, we do it with the playing, not with the saying. But it is true that it's difficult to keep the simplicity of the flow, the meaningful direction of the line of a melody, if you think of all the details that are written in the score with the accompaniment portions, harmonization, and the different rhythmic patterns. And then you add on top of the cake the, I would say, icing would be the rubato. And the rubato is a tasteless or tasteful or exaggerated or not enough, according to everybody's individual tastes. You could have linger and then flow forward. And it's not necessary. It's also a good thing to, when you start learning the piece, to express it at its meaningful eloquence without the recourse to this kind of tempo, structural flexibility that gives a little bit more of a spoken meaning to a specific syllable. I would like to dance with you. That is something that you try to imitate on the piano. Again, with the piano, you don't have lyrics, and you don't have vibrato, and you don't sustain the sound, but you plan so that you organize it as if. And so when I drive or speak to students or friends the piece, or I walk in the street and I think of the piece because it plays inside your head after you have taught it or played it, like as you, most of you know, that happens to all of us, then all of a sudden it's reduced to its simple expression, do, re, fa, si, la, sol, re, do. Or even the introduction, do, mi, la, si, do, la, mi, si, do, la, mi, si, do, so, si, la, sol, fa. Fa, so, fa, mi, fa, la, sol, mi, re, fa, mi, re, re. And then the delay, do, sol, si. And then re in the bottom, and do, re, fa, si, la, sol, the statement. Most of the time, the introductions like this one, in Chopin was while he was in the salons, he would have to interrupt the noise of the audience who is there mostly to enjoy socializing, and he's playing, but then he wants to be heard, which is understandable. And to command attention, he would play an introduction that's a bit bombastic. It's arpeggio of Neapolitan 6 that nobody knows it is before you hear it. It's in G minor, but of course, as you know, it is. And finally, then you hear the melody of the theme once you have obtained the attention of your audience that was their noise in the beginning. Of course, in concert halls today, people are so respectful of the piece that you start in the silence, and then in the same silence. It's just beautiful respect. But it's important to be aware of this kind of approach that the music of Chopin, which was mostly improvised and then subsequently notated, and probably not as it was improvised, but how to know. Nobody recorded, obviously. But we assume, also because of pedagogical approach, how to be playable compared to probably more complex things he played, or we try to think it might be the case. But like for Mozart cadenzas, we assume it, and sometimes those who heard him notate in their letters that he didn't write very complex cadenzas improvise. Well, it's all relative in how you define it. So it's difficult to know objectively. But it is true that the spontaneity of the interpretation that comes when you do an improvisation is that you don't know the end, or you don't plan it, and you let yourself sort of wander in the music and express different moods and go through different expressions till a coda that will bring perhaps some virtuosity, as it is the case for this one. Well, anyway, today all this out of context might be just historical awareness. But something remains which is so meaningful, that is not music of the past today, but music of the present when played today, when brought alive from the page of the score. And I find that very humbling and very expressive at the same time, as if we not reinvented because we play what we read and we're respectful of what we read to the extent to which all the notations give us the exact definition. But of course, thankfully, in a way, it gives us room for our own different approach to how you organize the flow of things. Nevertheless, the essence of the music is that it seems to be so meaningfully present and talking to the soul of the listener, to the performer as well. And I find it fascinating when music had evolved since this 19th century in Paris for Chopin into atonal, post-tonal, and who knows what non-tonal. And then the dissonances became consonant, and the next generation dissonances become their own consonances. The ear, the psyche, the musicianship develops an acquaintance to... we get acquainted with other pieces that have other styles, and but it doesn't erase the expression of this older way of expressing things, which seems to reach an eternal soulful connection with us that makes it as meaningful to play today as it might have been then, and as it will be in the future. I am sure of that, and I hope that it will keep on giving such a meaningful, soulful connection to the next generations also, and fulfillment, and strive towards reaching the expression of it. Thank you.